First of all, many thanks to you, Ms. Rafiq, to Mr. Ali Daliri, President, and to the other organizers at Faro for organizing the annual conference. It's my honor to join you and to share a few remarks. And I also note that we are speaking, as has been mentioned, during the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and we're also commemorating the International Human Rights Day for 2025. Stopping gender-based violence resonates more in Afghanistan than almost anywhere in the world. I'm going to make, since the title of the conference is The World and the Human Rights Crisis in Afghanistan, I'm going to perhaps follow on from Ms. Belkis Roshan's excellent remarks with a few more comments about the human rights situation. And then I'll talk a bit more about the world situation and then come back to the human rights situation. I've actually made 4 reports as Special Rapporteur this year on the human rights situation in Afghanistan. 2 of them have been general reports, and 2 were on specific subjects. The first one that was specific was on the Amr bil Maruf, and the second one was on access to justice for women and girls. And I have to conclude that the human rights situation is not improving. With regard to the situation for Afghan women, it has deteriorated dramatically since 2021, with women and girls bearing the brunt of repressive policies that deepen their marginalization. They're being pushed out of public life, deprived of their most basic human rights, and subjected to widespread, systematic, and deliberate violence. Their struggle represents one of the most pressing human rights challenges anywhere today. It demands our sustained attention, action, and solidarity. The Taliban's restrictions on nearly every aspect of women and girls' lives, freedom of movement, access to education, right to work, right to healthcare, to expression, and even to participate in public life, constitutes a form of violence in themselves. These are not neutral policies, they're tools of domination. And the restrictions are further codified through laws, decrees, edicts, and most notably, the so-called PVPV law. Through such directives, the Taliban have institutionalized discrimination and embedded violence into the legal, social, and political fabric of Afghan society. A word on education. Let me be clear. Education is not a luxury. It's not something reserved for one part of the population based on their gender or any other identity or status. It's a human right. It's a tool of liberation. It's the foundation for every society that hopes to thrive. And more than being a right, educated women are the key to development. Health improves, economies grow, violence decreases, and durable peace is more likely when girls are educated. And critically, the next generation of children, boys as well as girls, grow up knowing that women are scientists, doctors, engineers, lawyers, writers, artists. In short, they are role models and leaders. But the human rights crisis in Afghanistan does not end with the treatment of women and girls. There are, in fact, many other elements to this crisis. there's a shrinking of civic space, pressure on media. There's been a enormous damage done to the rule of law. Um, uh, Minorities and marginalized groups, particularly ethnic and religious marginalized groups, have been sidelined, are, I would say, persecuted. I won't go into all of this now due to lack of time, but I've covered these points in my reports. I want to instead move to the global picture to give some global context and to help explain why it's so challenging to see progress in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, it's not a pretty picture. Globally, the human rights ecosystem is under pressure, including on women's rights. There's diminishing respect for international law, examples being the conflict in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories and Ukraine. Israel, the US, and Russia have all blatantly ignored or violated international law. This includes failing to abide by the directions of international institutions such as the ICJ and the ICC. Unfortunately, the UN is also being sidelined and ignored. UN officials have been attacked. The prosecutors and staff of the ICC have been sanctioned. The Special Rapporteur, my colleague on the occupied Palestinian territories, has also been sanctioned by the US. Other special procedures mandate holders, my colleagues, have been attacked as well. And there is not enough defense of us by the UN system or by member states. There's a rollback on gender issues, which has become very sensitive to even discuss internationally. Gender equality is going backwards the fastest in Afghanistan, but it's also in retreat worldwide. Immigration has become a top contentious issue, as was already mentioned by Ms. Roshan. This includes not only Iran and Pakistan, as was mentioned earlier, but also the US and Europe. Politically, right-wing, anti-immigrant parties are popular with electorates. And this is impacting Afghans and many other communities around the world who need refuge. I have never seen the human rights system so badly affected as it is now. Not only the UN, but civil society organizations also are undergoing a crisis, especially a budget crisis. There's been a massive reduction in funding for the UN, and this is badly affecting all agencies within the UN system. It affects the amount of humanitarian aid going to Afghanistan, and it also affects the funding for the UN's Human Rights Office and affects my mandate. For example, all special procedures mandate holders like myself can only undertake one country visit a year now for budget reasons. So even if the Taliban allowed me to go into Afghanistan, it could only be for one 10-day visit in a whole year. I am supposed to have 11 support staff. How many do I have? I have 3. This badly affects my capacity to fulfill the duties given to me by the Human Rights Council. The budget for all of these staff has been approved, but according to the Office of the High Commissioner, which provides the support staff, the cash is not available due to the failure of many member states to pay their dues to the UN. As of December 1st, 145 out of 193 states had paid their bills to the UN, with only 4 weeks to go to the end of the year. The US and Russia have not paid this year. $1.6 billion is owed to the UN. The regular budget will be decreasing next year by more than 15%, and around 2,700 posts, jobs have been cut at the UN. And I'll remind everyone that the human rights pillar only receives about 3% of the total budget. It is already hugely underfunded, and now it is much worse. The global human rights situation is extremely serious. In fact, the global security situation has reached the level that Popes Francis and now Pope Leo have described the current global conflicts as Third World War fought piecemeal. That is a continuous series of regional wars that together resemble a larger conflict driven by arms trades and indifference. And I would emphasize the last word. Returning to Afghanistan, I've described the global crisis to place the situation in Afghanistan in context. It makes it more challenging to address than ever before. So what can we do in this very difficult situation in Afghanistan? I've been advocating for what I call an all-tools approach. There's a number of elements to this approach. It includes only principled engagement, principled democracy that avoids normalization or legitimization of the Taliban until there are demonstrated, measurable, and independently verified improvements in the human rights situation measured against agreed benchmarks. There also needs to be accountability, and there has been some progress on that, including the arrest warrants for the crime of gender persecution issued by the International Criminal Court earlier this year, possible action at the International Court of Justice under the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination against CEDAW against women, the establishment in the Human Rights Council in August of an independent investigative mechanism for Afghanistan, and the possible codification of gender apartheid. All of these need to be pursued. There also needs to be support for civil society, including both political and financial support, especially women-focused and women-led organizations. Humanitarian aid and protection and support for refugees and Afghans in exile is also badly needed. In terms of discussions about the future of Afghanistan, all these discussions must be inclusive of the diversity of Afghanistan and especially include Afghan women. They must be included in all political processes and consulted with meaningfully when making policies regarding Afghanistan, including by the international community in the Doha or any other process. And the centrality of human rights in all political processes and any engagement with the Taliban must be emphasized. It is really essential. So I'm going to round up there and say that the situation in Afghanistan is very challenging. The situation globally is also very challenging. But on the occasion of Human Rights Day, we need to remember where where the Declaration of Human Rights came from, where the UN system came from. It arose from the ashes of the Second World War, and it arose out of a recognition and a determination that if there is to be durable peace with equality and prosperity, it must be based in human rights. And human rights must be based in the equality of women and men. So we must return, despite all these challenges, to fighting for human rights. And I am inspired by all of you who, as Afghans, raise your voices and will not accept what I have heard from some, including some countries, saying that there is a reality in Afghanistan, the Taliban are there, and we need to accept them and be pragmatic in our approach. No, pragmatism will not lead to durable peace and to respect for the dignity of all humans. What's needed is a principled approach and an approach that has a vision and is unified amongst all of those who believe in the principles of human rights. I'd like to end there, and I thank you very much.